The wind was cold that evening, carrying a light chill that hinted at the coming rain. The road stretched endlessly through the quiet countryside, lined with tall trees whose shadows danced under the pale glow of the setting sun. She had been driving for almost an hour after finishing a long shift at the hospital, her eyes tired but her heart light, looking forward to the comfort of home. The sky had that deep orange shade that always made her think of peace, but that feeling vanished the moment she heard the loud pop and felt her car lurch to one side. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she slowed down, pulling over to the side of the empty road. When she stepped out, the evening breeze brushed against her face and she saw it. The rear tire was completely flat. Her heart sank. She had never changed a tire before. She looked around, but the road was deserted. Not a single car in sight, not a single house nearby, only the sound of crickets and the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. She pulled out her phone, hoping for help, but the screen mocked her with the words, "No signal." She sighed and leaned against the car for a moment. It had been a long day already. 10 hours of caring for patients, running between rooms and trying to keep her smile strong. And now this. She could almost laugh at how unfair the day felt, but instead she just closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The light was fading fast, and the sky was turning purple. A few cars passed by in the distance, their headlights flashing briefly before disappearing. She waved once or twice, but none of them stopped. The loneliness began to sink in. She tried opening the trunk to see if there was a spare tire, and there was, but she had no clue what to do with it. The tools were there too, but they looked foreign, complicated and heavy. She stood there staring at them, wondering if she should just wait until someone came along. After a few minutes, she sat on the edge of the car, hugging her jacket closer around her shoulders. Her hands were getting cold and her heart was starting to race with worry. What if no one came? What if she had to spend the night here? Then she heard it, the slow rumble of a truck engine coming from behind. She turned around quickly, her eyes catching the dim headlights of an old pickup approaching. It slowed down, and for a brief moment she wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or afraid. But then the truck stopped a few feet ahead of her car and the driver stepped out. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s, wearing a thick jacket and a baseball cap. His face looked kind but tired, like someone who had seen many long days. "You got a flat?" he asked in a calm, steady voice. She nodded quickly, trying to hide how nervous she was. "Yeah, I think so. I was driving home from work and it just happened." He looked at the tire and gave a small nod. "That's a bad one. You got a spare?" "Yes, but I don't really know how to change it," she admitted softly, feeling a little embarrassed. He smiled faintly. "That's all right. I'll take care of it. Happens to everyone at least once." Before she could say anything, he went to the back of his truck, pulled out a flashlight and crouched near her car. His movements were calm and confident, the kind of quiet skill that comes from experience. The light from his flashlight flickered against his hands as he loosened the bolts, lifted the car and replaced the tire. She stood nearby, watching silently, her heart slowly relaxing. It was strange, she thought, how someone could appear out of nowhere just when you needed help most. She felt grateful but also curious. There was something gentle about the way he worked. No rush, no complaint, just quiet focus. "You must be freezing," he said after a few minutes without looking up. "Long day?" "Yeah," she replied. "I work at the hospital in the next town. I was just trying to get home before dark." "That's good work you do," he said. "Takes a kind heart to do it." She smiled faintly, not sure what to say. It had been a while since anyone said something kind to her without wanting something in return. The world felt harsh most days, especially in her line of work. After about 15 minutes, he stood up and brushed the dust from his hands. "There," he said. "All done. You should be good to go." She blinked in surprise. "That fast? Wow. I don't even know how to thank you." He shook his head lightly. "No need, just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "If you ever see someone stuck like this, you stop and help them too." That's how the world keeps going. His words were simple but warm, and she nodded immediately. "I will, I promise." He gave a small smile, almost sad in a way, and turned back toward his truck. "All right then. You take care now." Before she could even reach into her bag for some cash or offer him something to drink, he had already climbed into his old pickup. The engine started with a soft growl, and he began to drive away slowly. She stood there watching him until the red tail lights disappeared down the road. A quiet calm settled over her as she realized how quickly everything had changed. One moment she was stranded and helpless, and the next a stranger had appeared like some small miracle. She got back into her car, started the engine, and was about to pull onto the road when something caught her eye. There was a small piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. She frowned and stepped out, thinking it might be a receipt or some trash blown by the wind, but when she pulled it free, she realized it was a folded note. The handwriting was neat, a little shaky, like someone who wrote with care. She unfolded it slowly, and her breath caught as she read the first line. The note said, "My wife used to be a nurse too. She died last year on this very road when no one stopped to help. I couldn't save her, but maybe helping you tonight was my way of saying goodbye." Her heart clenched. She read it again just to be sure she hadn't misunderstood. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She looked back down the road, but the truck was long gone. The quiet around her suddenly felt heavy, filled with meaning she couldn't explain. She stood there for a long time, holding the note against her chest. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees, and somewhere far away a car passed by. But in that moment, it was as if the world had stopped moving. She thought about the man, his calm face, the way he worked without expecting anything. She thought about his wife, the tragedy hidden behind his gentle kindness. Finally, she went back to her car and sat inside, the note resting on the passenger seat. Her hands were still trembling. She started the engine again, but didn't drive off right away. Instead, she stared at the paper beside her, her mind running through everything that had just happened. She felt something deep shift inside her, a mix of sadness and gratitude. She realized that what the man had done was not just an act of kindness. It was something far greater. He had carried his pain quietly and turned it into compassion for someone else. As the first drops of rain began to hit the windshield, she whispered softly, "Thank you." The words were for him, wherever he was, and for the woman he had lost. She hoped he heard them somehow. Then, wiping her eyes, she began to drive slowly down the road toward home. All the way back, her thoughts were on the stranger and his story. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from, but she would never forget him. She promised herself that night that she would keep his kindness alive, that if she ever saw someone in need, she would stop, no matter how late, no matter how tired she was, because sometimes, she realized, the smallest act of kindness could carry the deepest meaning, and sometimes a stranger's compassion could change your heart forever. As she drove into the soft rain, the note on the seat beside her seemed to glow faintly in the light from the dashboard. She didn't know it then, but that one meeting would stay with her for years to come. A reminder that love, loss, and kindness are all parts of the same beautiful, painful story called life. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. The sky was soft gray and rain still clung to the window from the night before. But her mind wasn't on her usual morning routine. The first thing she thought of was the note, the one she had found under her windshield. She reached for her purse and pulled it out again, smoothing the small piece of paper as if afraid the words might fade. She read it once more, slowly this time. "My wife used to be a nurse too. She died last year on this very road when no one stopped to help. I couldn't save her, but maybe helping you tonight was my way of saying goodbye." The words hit her just as deeply as they had the night before. They weren't just words from a stranger. They were a part of someone's pain, someone's love that had been lost but never forgotten. She imagined him driving away alone into the night, carrying a heartbreak that still hadn't healed. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. Outside, the road glistened with rain, and every time a car passed by, she wondered if one of them might be his old pickup truck. Something inside her felt unsettled, like she couldn't just move on. She wanted to find him, to thank him properly, to tell him that what he did mattered more than he probably realized. Later that day, she drove back to the same stretch of road. It was quieter now, the fields on either side wet from the rain. She parked in the same spot where she had been stranded. The tire tracks were still faintly visible in the mud. She stood there for a few minutes, just listening to the wind. She hoped, maybe foolishly, that the man might pass by again, but all she heard were birds and the hum of distant traffic. She felt strange standing there alone, like the road itself carried a story she couldn't fully understand. As she looked around, she noticed a small wooden cross by the side of the road. It was half hidden in the tall grass. She walked closer, and her chest tightened when she saw it. The cross had faded letters carved into it, a name and a date. The date matched what the note had said, almost exactly a year ago. Someone had placed flowers there once, but they were long wilted. She stood silently, her heart aching for a woman she had never met and a man who still carried the weight of that loss. She crouched down and brushed the dirt from the cross. "I'm sorry," she whispered quietly. She didn't know why, but she felt like she needed to say it. Maybe not for herself, but for him. Before leaving, she took one of the small flowers from her car and placed it beside the cross. Then she drove back home, her mind full of questions. Who was he? Where did he live? Did anyone know what had happened? That evening, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She decided to ask around. She started with a small diner near the edge of town, a place where truckers often stopped. When she walked in, the warm smell of coffee and pancakes greeted her. The man behind the counter smiled and asked if she wanted a table, but she shook her head. "I was wondering," she began hesitantly. "Do you happen to know a man who drives an old pickup truck? He helped me with a flat tire last night, somewhere near the old highway." The man behind the counter looked thoughtful. "Old pickup, you say? Around 50, gray hair, quiet kind of fellow?" Her eyes lit up. "Yes, that sounds like him." He sighed softly and leaned on the counter. "I think you're talking about Tom. He used to come by here every week. Always sat at that corner booth." He pointed toward the back. "Nice man. Didn't talk much after his wife passed away." Her heart jumped. "So you know about his wife?" "Yeah," the man said with a sad nod. "Terrible accident. Happened last year on that same stretch of road. He never got over it. Used to say she was the best thing that ever happened to him. After she died, he stopped working, stopped coming around as much. Last time I saw him was maybe 2 months ago." "Do you know where he lives?" she asked softly. "I think he had a small house near the lake about 20 minutes from here, but I can't be sure if he still lives there. He was talking about moving away, said there were too many memories here." She thanked him for the information and sat quietly in her car afterward. A part of her wanted to drive straight to that lake and find him, but another part wondered if she should. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Maybe helping her was his way of closing a painful chapter. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to see him, not just for herself, but for him too. Over the next few days, she couldn't focus at work. She kept thinking about him, about how a stranger could carry such deep sorrow yet still choose kindness. That thought alone moved her more than she could explain. Finally, on her next day off, she decided to go. She drove toward the lake as the sun began to set. The road curved gently through fields and woods until it opened up to a quiet lakeside community. She saw a few small houses, most of them old and weathered. She wasn't sure which one was his, but something told her she would know. She parked near a small white house with a rusted mailbox and a garden that looked like it hadn't been cared for in a while. There was an old truck parked in the driveway, the same one she remembered from that night. Her heart started pounding. She walked up slowly and knocked on the door. No one answered. She waited, then knocked again. Still nothing. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should leave a note. Just as she was about to turn back, she heard footsteps inside. The door opened slightly and there he was. He looked surprised but calm, just as he had that night. "Oh," he said softly. "You're the one from the highway," she smiled nervously. "Yes, I just wanted to thank you properly. You helped me when no one else would, and I found your note." He nodded slowly, his eyes gentle but distant. "I'm glad you got home safe." "I read what you wrote," she said quietly. "About your wife. I'm so sorry for your loss." He looked down for a moment, his hands tightening slightly on the edge of the door. She was a nurse. Always took care of everyone but herself. That night she was driving home from a late shift, same as you. A tire burst. People passed by but no one stopped. Her throat tightened. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I wasn't there," he continued. "I was supposed to pick her up, but I got caught up fixing something at home. By the time I got there, it was too late." The pain in his voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like glass. She wanted to say something comforting, but no words seemed enough. "I'm sorry," she said softly again. He gave a small, tired smile. "It's all right. You can't change what's done. But when I saw you there, stranded the same way she was, I couldn't just keep driving. I think maybe it was my chance to make peace with it." For a moment, they both stood in silence. The air was heavy with emotion, but it wasn't unbearable. It felt human, real, honest. "Thank you," she said finally. "You helped more than you know." "And I'll never forget what you said about helping others." He nodded slowly. "That's all I could ask." They talked a little longer about her work, about the town, about his wife's kindness. Before leaving, she asked if she could bring fresh flowers to the roadside cross. His eyes softened and he simply said, she would have liked that. When she drove away that evening, the lake glowed gold in the sunset. She looked at her rearview mirror and saw him still standing at the doorway, watching quietly. As she turned the corner, she felt tears in her eyes, but they weren't from sadness alone. They were from something deeper, the kind of emotion that makes you see life differently. From that day on, she began to notice things she hadn't before. The way people rushed past others without looking. The way small kindnesses often went unspoken. She promised herself she wouldn't be like that anymore. That night, before bed, she placed the note in a small box beside her bed. She whispered a silent prayer for him and for the woman who had inspired his kindness. Then she closed her eyes, feeling a strange peace wash over her. Some meetings, she realized, are not accidents. They happen to remind us that even in the quiet corners of life, humanity still exists, in the hands that help, in the hearts that heal, and in the strangers who become unforgettable. She couldn't stop thinking about him for days after that evening by the lake. His quiet sadness, the weight he carried for someone he loved and lost, and yet the way he still chose to help her. It all stayed in her mind, almost like a rhythm she couldn't escape. She found herself imagining his life, wondering if he smiled at small things anymore, or if the memory of his wife shadowed every step he took. It was unusual for her to dwell so deeply on a stranger, but he wasn't just any stranger. He was someone who had shown her that pain and kindness could exist together in one person, that love didn't disappear even when life seemed unbearably cruel, and more than that, she felt compelled to know more about him, not to pry, but to understand the heart behind that quiet act of generosity. The following morning, she drove back to the roadside cross. The small wooden marker stood as it always did, simple but powerful. She knelt beside it, smoothing the flowers she had placed there earlier. The soil was damp from the rain, and she felt a strange sense of closeness to both him and the woman he had lost. It was as if she could feel the invisible threads that tied all their lives together, even across a year of separation and grief. She stayed there for a long time, watching the sun rise over the horizon. The road that had felt lonely and empty the night she got the flat tire now seemed full of stories. Stories of people who had hurt and healed, given and received, all without ever knowing it. She realized then that her encounter with him wasn't just a chance meeting. It was a reminder of how fragile and beautiful life could be. When she returned home, she started making small changes in her daily routine. She began noticing people more. The tired cashier at the grocery store, the delivery driver with a hurried step, the neighbor struggling with grocery bags. She stopped to smile, to ask if they needed help, to say a kind word. Each small interaction felt like a thread she was weaving into the fabric of the world, inspired by the quiet man who had helped her. Still, there was a part of her that wanted to reach out to him directly. She thought about driving back to the lake house, leaving a note, or knocking on the door again. But every time she considered it, she hesitated. What if he didn't want to be found? What if revisiting the past reopened wounds he had been trying to heal quietly? She didn't want to intrude. She wanted to honor the space he needed while still feeling connected to the moment they had shared. One evening, she decided to try another approach. She visited the small diner again, the place where someone had told her about him. The diner was empty except for the woman behind the counter. She smiled faintly when she walked in. "I was here a few days ago," she began, "asking about the man who helped me on the highway. Tom, I think his name was." The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember. You're the one who found that note. He came here often, though not much anymore. Do you know if he's okay?" she asked softly. The woman hesitated. "He keeps to himself. Quiet man. Sad, I suppose. But he's alive. That's all I know." Her heart sank slightly, but she also felt a strange relief. At least he was alive. At least he was still somewhere in the world, breathing and moving, even if he carried a heavy weight. As she left the diner, she realized that part of what she needed wasn't just to see him again. It was to carry forward the lesson he had given her. That life could be harsh and unfair, but even the smallest acts of care could leave a mark that lasted far longer than anyone could imagine. Over the next few weeks, she found herself looking for opportunities to help others more intentionally. She volunteered at the hospital's community clinic, spent weekends assisting with local charity drives, and made an effort to speak to people who seemed lonely or struggling. Each act reminded her of that night on the road, of the man's quiet strength, and of the note that had touched her so deeply. One rainy afternoon, as she walked back to her car from the clinic, she noticed a man struggling to change a tire by the side of the road. Her first instinct was to call for help, but then she remembered the stranger from her own experience. She grabbed her umbrella and ran over, offering to assist. The man looked up, surprised but grateful. Together, they managed to change the tire, sharing small smiles and polite conversation. As she walked back to her car, she realized that the chain of kindness had continued. The stranger had inspired her, and now she was passing that inspiration forward. Yet even as she embraced this new rhythm of life, she couldn't shake the curiosity about him. She imagined him sitting quietly in his house near the lake, looking out at the water, perhaps thinking of the past but still living each day in his own way. She imagined his hands, rough and steady, fixing the tire that night, and she imagined the grief he carried in silence. There was a weight to that memory that made her feel both sorrowful and grateful at the same time. Late one evening, she sat by her window with the note in her hand again. The rain tapped softly against the glass, and she traced the words with her fingers, feeling their meaning in a way that went beyond language. She realized that sometimes the impact of a single act of kindness wasn't visible immediately. Sometimes it took days, weeks, or even years for the ripple to be noticed. And sometimes those ripples carried more power than any words could capture. As the weeks turned into months, she found herself visiting the roadside cross more often. Each time she placed fresh flowers there, sometimes leaving a small note about gratitude or hope. She didn't know if he ever came back to the spot, if he ever saw the flowers, but she felt it mattered regardless. Each act of remembrance connected her to that night, to him, and to the woman who had inspired his courage and compassion. One day, while helping a young mother with groceries, she heard herself repeating something she had heard from him. "Just stop and help someone," she said softly. The woman looked at her, surprised, then smiled warmly. It was a simple sentence, but it carried a lifetime of meaning. And in that moment, she understood fully. The stranger's influence wasn't just about fixing a tire. It was about the courage to act with empathy, even when life had left you hurt. She also began writing again, something she hadn't done since college. She filled pages with reflections on kindness, grief, and the small ways people could change each other's lives. Each page was a tribute, a way to honor the man who had appeared out of nowhere and reminded her that life was fragile, precious, and meant to be cared for. Even her friends noticed the change in her. She was calmer, more patient, and more willing to pause for strangers. She no longer rushed past people in need, and she found herself enjoying the simple interactions, a smile, a helping hand, a word of encouragement. Every time she helped someone, she remembered the stranger's face, the flashlight in the dark, the tire he had changed, and the note that had broken her heart. Yet she still wondered about him. Did he ever think about her? Did he ever feel lighter after that night? She imagined his quiet evenings by the lake, the hum of the water, the rustling of trees, and the memories of his wife. She imagined him smiling faintly at the kindness of strangers, perhaps feeling a little more hope for the world. And then one morning, as she walked along the park near her house, she realized that maybe she didn't need to find him again. Maybe what mattered most was carrying the lesson he had given her, to act with care, even when no one was watching, and to let grief coexist with kindness rather than overshadow it. The memory of that night, of the stranger, of the note, had become a quiet guide in her life. It reminded her to pause, to notice, to care, and to leave small marks of humanity wherever she could. She smiled softly to herself, feeling a gentle warmth that hadn't been there before. The man on the highway, with his quiet sorrow and steadfast hands, had changed her life in ways she could never have predicted. And now as she went about her days, she carried him with her, not as a shadow, but as a light. She knew one thing for certain: no matter where life took her, she would never forget the stranger who fixed her flat tire, who left a note that broke her heart, and who reminded her that even in the smallest gestures there could be infinite meaning. And in that realization, she found a peace she hadn't known before, a quiet understanding that the world was full of unseen kindness, waiting for someone willing to notice it, carry it, and pass it forward. Even though she had started to carry his lesson in her daily life, a part of her couldn't let go of the need to know more about him. The image of his quiet face, the careful way he had fixed the tire, and the depth of sorrow hidden in his note stayed with her constantly. It was as if meeting him had opened a window into a life that was both heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time. She kept wondering if he ever thought of her, if he ever felt lighter, or if he had simply returned to his quiet routine by the lake. On a rainy morning, she decided she couldn't wait any longer. She took a deep breath, packed a small bag with water, a notebook, and some flowers, and drove toward the lakeside neighborhood where she had first found him. The sky was heavy and gray, but that didn't stop her. Her mind was filled with determination, not urgency. She didn't want to disturb him. She only wanted to understand. As she reached the familiar road, her car slowed. Everything looked the same as before. The trees lining the narrow lanes, the puddles reflecting the dull light, and the quiet hum of distant traffic. She parked near the house with the old truck in the driveway. It had been months since she first saw him, but the memory of that night was still vivid. She carried the flowers carefully, hoping they might bring some comfort if he was willing to accept them. She knocked gently on the door and waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Just as she considered leaving a note and walking away, the door opened slowly. There he was, the same man from that night, older now perhaps, but the calmness in his eyes and the quiet strength of his presence hadn't changed. "You came back," he said softly, a mixture of surprise and curiosity in his voice. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but quiet. "I wanted to. I don't know. I just wanted to see if you were okay, and to thank you again, for everything." He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal, how much to trust. Then he nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. The house smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Dust covered the corners and sunlight fell through the windows in soft patterns. It was humble and quiet, just like him. They sat at the small kitchen table, the flowers she had brought resting on the counter. She didn't know where to start, so she stayed silent for a few moments, listening to the rain tapping gently against the windows. "I think about that night sometimes," he said finally, his voice low but clear. "The night you got the flat tire. I think about it a lot more than I thought I would." She nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. "It changed me," she admitted softly. "Not just because you helped me, but because of everything you wrote. About your wife, about that road. It stayed with me." He sighed, his gaze fixed on the table. "I don't talk about her much anymore. It's hard. People don't really understand how much you can miss someone, how much a single moment can shape the rest of your life." "I think I understand," she said quietly. "I don't know her, but I know you. And what you did for me. It meant more than I can say." He looked at her, and for a moment his eyes glistened. Sometimes helping someone else is all you can do to feel like you're still connected. Like a part of what you loved is still alive in the world. She smiled faintly, realizing he was speaking not just about her, but about life itself. The sadness in his voice wasn't weakness. It was a deep human truth. He had carried grief and transformed it into an act of kindness. She felt both humbled and inspired. They talked for hours. He told her about his wife, about the life they had built together, the small routines, the shared laughter, and the quiet moments that had made their life meaningful. He described the accident in gentle terms, not dwelling on the horror, but on the love and memories that had filled her life. She listened, feeling a mixture of sorrow and admiration. The story of their love was a reminder of how fragile and precious life could be. She told him about her life as a nurse, about the small ways she tried to help others, and about the impact his actions had had on her. For the first time, she spoke of her own grief and struggles, things she had rarely shared with anyone. The conversation flowed naturally, not forced, and each word seemed to carry the weight of understanding and trust. At some point, she noticed he had paused, staring out the window at the lake. The rain had stopped, leaving the surface smooth and reflective. "I haven't been back to the cross," he said quietly. "Not in months. Too painful. I go sometimes," she said softly. "I leave flowers. I talk to it, like a way to remember. You don't have to go alone if you don't want to." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of hope in his expression. "Maybe I could," he admitted. It's strange how one person's presence can make a difference even when you think nothing will ever heal. She smiled gently. It does. Small kindnesses can ripple further than we imagine. You reminded me of that. You reminded me to notice, to care, to act. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. They shared tea, stories, and silences that felt full of meaning. Each moment built a connection that went beyond words. She realized that this wasn't about solving his grief or hers. It was about bearing witness to each other's lives, understanding and holding space for what was real. When it was time to leave, she felt a strange reluctance. She didn't want to step out into the world alone again, but she also knew that some bonds didn't require constant presence to be meaningful. Thank you, she said softly, for letting me come, for trusting me with your story. He nodded, a small smile forming. Thank you for coming. You've reminded me that the world isn't as lonely as it feels sometimes. Before she left, she placed the flowers she had brought on the counter near the window. He didn't take them, didn't ask her why. He simply watched, letting the gesture exist without explanation. She realized that sometimes giving and receiving didn't need words to carry meaning. As she walked back to her car, the sun had begun to set, casting golden light over the lake. She looked back at the house one last time, feeling a sense of closure mixed with hope. The stranger from the highway, the man who had carried grief silently and acted with kindness, had become more than just a memory. He had become a living lesson about love, loss, and the quiet power of compassion. Driving home, she thought about the ripples of that one night, how his small act had traveled from him to her and now through her to others. She realized that the story wasn't over. The impact of kindness, when genuine and heartfelt, could continue long after the moment itself had passed. And maybe that was the real message, that even when life breaks your heart, it also gives you the chance to heal and help others heal too. By the time she reached her house, it was dark. She placed the note he had left her in a small box beside her bed, and for the first time in months she felt a quiet sense of peace. She knew she might never fully understand the depth of his grief, but she understood something equally important, that human connection, even fleeting, could change lives in ways unseen. The memory of that night on the road, the note, and the quiet man who had appeared out of nowhere remained with her always. She would never forget it, and she knew she would carry the lesson forward, passing it on quietly through every act of kindness, every smile, every moment of attention she offered to someone in need. Sometimes, she realized, the most meaningful encounters in life come from strangers. Sometimes the people we meet in passing leave marks on our hearts that last forever. And sometimes the quiet gestures of fixing a tire, leaving a note, showing up without expectation, are enough to remind us what it truly means to care. She drove into the night, feeling the weight of the world and the light of humanity in equal measure, and she knew that what had started with a flat tire on a lonely road had transformed her life forever. The days that followed felt lighter, though not in a way she could have predicted. The encounter with the man by the lake, the note he had left, and the memory of that night on the highway became more than just a story she remembered. They became a part of how she lived. Each morning she woke up with a subtle awareness of the people around her, the small moments that often went unnoticed, and the quiet opportunities to offer help. She began her routine differently. She paid more attention to the barista who always looked tired in the mornings, to the elderly man who shuffled along the sidewalk, and to the neighbors who rarely spoke but often needed a hand. She started small, offering a smile, holding a door, carrying groceries, sometimes giving a few coins or a warm meal to someone who needed it. Every act reminded her of that night when a stranger had stopped for her, when she had been the one left helpless on the roadside, and when someone had quietly carried the weight of his own grief to offer her help. One afternoon, while volunteering at a local community center, she came across a young woman struggling with a stroller and a bag of groceries. The woman looked overwhelmed, exhausted, and on the verge of tears. She didn't hesitate. She walked over, took a few bags, and helped guide her to the car. The young woman's relief was palpable. She smiled warmly and thanked her over and over. As she walked away, she felt the familiar warmth she had felt that night, the quiet satisfaction of helping someone, of connecting even briefly. Yet despite these acts and the change in her outlook, she couldn't shake the curiosity about the man. She wondered if he had found any peace, if he still visited the cross by the roadside, or if the lake still held a sense of solace for him. She imagined him walking along the edge of the water, The sun reflecting off the surface, maybe thinking of his wife and the lives he had touched since her passing. The thought that he might still carry the same quiet sorrow she had witnessed both worried and comforted her. Months passed, and the seasons changed. Spring brought fresh blooms, sunlight filtering through trees, and a sense of renewal in the air. She spent more time outside, noticing the subtle beauty of life that often went unnoticed in her busy days. She visited the roadside cross regularly, placing flowers each time and sometimes leaving little notes, words of hope, gratitude, or remembrance. She didn't know if he ever saw them, and it didn't matter. She felt a connection to both him and the woman he had loved. The cross had become a symbol, not just of loss, but of resilience, kindness, and the invisible threads that connect people across space and time. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, she found herself walking along the road she had traveled that fateful night. The sky was painted in deep shades of pink and purple, the sun dipping below the horizon. Her heart tightened as she remembered the fear and helplessness she had felt when her tire had gone flat. But alongside that memory was the vivid image of him, kneeling beside her car, flashlight in hand, calm and patient, silently offering help. She reached the spot where it had all happened. The road was quiet now, almost peaceful. She imagined him standing there again, even if only in her mind, the weight of grief balanced with the act of helping someone else. She knelt beside the roadside cross, touching the small wooden marker gently. The flowers she had left weeks ago had wilted, but new ones had grown around it. She smiled softly. Life moved forward even in the presence of loss, and it carried beauty along with sorrow. She sat there for a while, just breathing, listening to the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of cars, and the quiet of the evening. It was a moment of reflection, of understanding, of gratitude. She realized how fragile life could be, how sudden events could alter the course of days, and how a single act of kindness could ripple far beyond the moment it occurred. That night, she returned home and wrote in her notebook. She wrote about the stranger, about the woman he had loved, about the impact that one quiet act had on her life. She wrote about the small ways she had tried to help others since that night, and about the feelings that remained deep inside her heart. Writing helped her process her thoughts, gave them form, and connected her to something larger than herself. As the weeks went on, she continued her efforts to help those around her. She noticed the loneliness in the eyes of patients at the hospital, the stress of coworkers who were quietly struggling, and the small burdens carried by strangers in the streets. She learned to offer help without expecting recognition, to act without seeking reward. Each action, however small, felt meaningful, a continuation of the lesson she had learned from the stranger on the highway. One evening, she decided to return to the lake house once more. She didn't know if he was still there, if he had moved, or if she would even see him. The drive was familiar now, and when she arrived, she saw the old pickup truck parked in the driveway, just as it had been months ago. Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated at the gate, unsure if she should knock, uncertain if she should intrude. But she knocked gently, and after a moment, the door opened. There he was, older, calm, but with the same quiet presence she remembered. "I didn't expect to see you again," he said softly, a small smile on his face. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," she admitted. "I wanted to see if you were okay and to thank you again. For everything." He nodded slowly, stepping aside to let her in. The house felt warm and familiar, as though time had barely moved. They sat together at the small kitchen table, the sun setting behind the lake, casting soft light through the windows. For hours they talked. He told her about the months that had passed, about the quiet routines he had maintained, and about the small ways he had tried to find peace. She shared her own journey, the ways she had tried to carry his lesson forward, and the moments that had reminded her of that night on the highway. There were silences too, comfortable and full of understanding, where no words were needed. At one point he looked at her and said, "You've changed. I can see it. You carry something with you now, something that wasn't there before, and it's beautiful." She felt warmth rise in her chest. "You taught me that," she said softly. "Not just by helping me, but by showing me what it means to act even when the world seems heavy, even when grief is present." He nodded, the weight in his eyes lighter than she had ever seen. Sometimes the world gives you a chance to do something small that matters more than you realize. That night, helping you was mine. She smiled, feeling a deep connection she hadn't known before. It wasn't just gratitude or admiration. It was understanding, empathy, and shared humanity. They had both carried loss, and they had both found a way to turn it into something meaningful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lake in gold and pink, she felt a sense of completion. She knew she might never fully understand all of his grief, and he might never entirely carry away the pain of losing his wife. But what mattered was that their lives had intersected, that a single act of kindness had created a ripple that touched both of them in ways they couldn't have predicted. Before leaving, she placed a small bouquet of flowers on the windowsill. He watched her, silent, allowing the gesture to exist without comment. She realized then that life often spoke in actions, not words, and that sometimes the most meaningful things were felt rather than explained. Driving home that evening, she reflected on the journey these months had taken her through, from the fear and helplessness of that flat tire on the dark highway, to the quiet act of kindness from a stranger, to the note that had broken her heart and shifted her perspective. She had been transformed. Her view of the world, of grief, of kindness, and of human connection had deepened in ways she could never have imagined. She kept the note he had left her in a special box, reading it occasionally to remind herself of the lesson it carried. She continued visiting the roadside cross, placing flowers and leaving small notes of hope and gratitude. She continued helping strangers, colleagues, and neighbors, always carrying the quiet reminder that one act of care could travel further than anyone could see. The stranger on the highway, the man who had carried grief and still chosen compassion, had changed her life. And in that change she found her own purpose, to act with kindness, to notice the unseen struggles of others and to pass forward the lessons she had been given. Life, she realized, was fragile and fleeting, but it was also full of opportunities to connect, to heal, and to make a difference. The memory of that night, the note, and the man's quiet courage would remain with her forever. And in honoring that memory through her own actions, she understood the true power of humanity, the way love, grief, and kindness intertwined to shape the world in subtle, enduring ways. As she drifted off to sleep that night, she held the note close, feeling a warmth and peace she hadn't known before. The story that began with a flat tire had become so much more than a simple encounter. It had become a lesson, a journey, and a reminder that even in sorrow, compassion could shine through, illuminating lives and hearts in ways that lasted far beyond the moment. And in that understanding, she finally felt whole, carrying forward the light he had shown her, ready to touch the lives of others, just as he had touched hers.